It was a quiet night in Los Angeles, the kind where the hum of the city seemed to fade into the background. The streets were dimly lit, and the air carried a slight chill that hinted at the late hour. Snoop Dogg, whose real name is Calvin Cortazar, Broadus Jr., was driving home after wrapping up a long day at the recording studio. Known for his smooth flow, laid-back personality, and iconic contributions to hip-hop culture, Snoop had already begun making waves in the music industry. But on this particular evening, his life would take an unexpected turn, one that would test not only his courage, but also his ability to stay calm under immense pressure. Snoop's car rolled slowly through South Central LA, a neighborhood he knew well. Growing up in Long Beach, just a short drive away, he was no stranger to the challenges faced by black communities in Southern California. The early 1990s were a turbulent time for LA, a period marked by rising racial tensions, economic inequality, and strained relations between law enforcement and minority groups. Despite these hardships, Snoop had always managed to navigate life with a mix of charm, humor, and street smarts. He often joked about how those skills kept him out of trouble, or helped him talk his way out of it when things got dicey. Little did he know, those same traits would soon come into play in ways he couldn't have imagined. As Snoop cruised along the empty road, lost in thought about new lyrics he wanted to write, he noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. Red and blue strobes bathed his car in an eerie glow. Confused, he glanced around, trying to figure out why he'd been pulled over. He hadn't run a red light or sped through a stop sign. There was no obvious reason for the traffic stop. Still, Snoop did what anyone would do. He signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. The tires crunched against the gravel as he brought the vehicle to a halt. His heart sank slightly, knowing full well how routine traffic stops could escalate quickly for someone who looked like him. The officer approached the driver's side window, his boots thudding heavily against the pavement. Snoop watched him in the side mirror, taking note of the man's rigid posture and stern expression. There was something off about the way the officer moved, his steps deliberate, almost intimidating. When the officer finally reached the window, he didn't bother asking for Snoop's license or registration. Instead, he barked orders demanding that Snoop step out of the car immediately. The tone of his voice sent a shiver down Snoop's spine. It wasn't just authoritative. It was laced with hostility, the kind that made you feel small and powerless. Snoop hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He'd been pulled over before, but never like this. This felt different, charged with tension and aggression. Slowly, he opened the door and stepped out, keeping his hands visible to show he wasn't a threat. "What's going on, officer?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. He hoped that speaking politely might ease the situation, but the officer wasn't interested in pleasantries. Without warning, the cop grabbed Snoop roughly, slamming him against the hood of the car. Pain shot through Snoop's body as the cold metal pressed against his chest. He winced, but stayed silent, aware that resisting would only make things worse. Then came the sound that sent chills through Snoop's entire being, the unmistakable click of a gun being drawn. Before he could process what was happening, the barrel of the weapon pressed firmly against his temple. Time seemed to slow down as fear gripped him. Every breath felt labored, every heartbeat thunderous in his ears. Snoop closed his eyes for a brief second, trying to steady himself. He thought about his family, his friends, his dreams, all the things he still wanted to accomplish. Was this really how it was going to end? Over a routine traffic stop? The officer's voice cut through the haze of panic. "You think you're somebody special, huh?" he sneered, his words dripping with venom. Just another gangbanger trying to act tough. Snoop flinched at the racial slur that followed, feeling the weight of prejudice bearing down on him. It wasn't just the gun that terrified him, it was the hatred behind it. For years, Snoop had heard stories about police brutality and systemic racism, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. It stripped away any illusion of safety, leaving him raw and vulnerable. Despite the fear coursing through his veins, Snoop refused to let despair consume him. He reminded himself of everything he'd overcome to get to where he was today. Born into poverty, raised in a neighborhood plagued by violence and crime, He'd worked tirelessly to build a better future for himself. Music had been his escape, his lifeline, and now it gave him strength even in this darkest moment. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. Panicking wouldn't help. He needed to think clearly if he wanted to survive. The officer continued ranting, each word sharper than the last. "You people never learn, do you?" he spat, his grip tightening on the gun. Snoop clenched his jaw, biting back the anger that threatened to boil over. Losing control now would only provoke the man further. Instead, he chose to rely on the one thing he knew best, his ability to connect with others. Even during tense moments growing up, Snoop had learned how to defuse situations using humor and charm. Maybe, just maybe, he could use those same skills here. "I'm nobody special," Snoop replied softly, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Just a guy trying to make it home safe." The officer paused, caught off guard by the calmness in Snoop's tone. For a split second, there was silence. Snoop seized the opportunity, speaking slowly and deliberately. "I ain't done nothing wrong," he added, injecting a hint of vulnerability into his words. "Can we please figure this out without anybody getting hurt?" His plea hung in the air, fragile yet powerful. The officer didn't respond right away, but the pressure of the gun eased ever so slightly. It was a small victory, but one that gave Snoop hope. He realized then that survival wasn't just about physical strength. It was about finding a way to reach the humanity buried beneath layers of hatred and fear. And so, even as the world around him felt like it was crumbling, Snoop held on to that glimmer of possibility, determined to see the night through. As the cold steel of the gun pressed against his temple, Snoop Dogg's mind raced. Every second felt like an eternity, and the weight of the situation bore down on him with crushing intensity. But amidst the chaos, something inside Snoop clicked, a quiet resolve that refused to let fear dictate his actions. He knew he couldn't fight back physically. Instead, he relied on the one tool he'd honed over years of navigating tough streets and tougher conversations: his words. The officer stood over him, breathing heavily, his grip still firm on the weapon. His face was twisted with anger, but also something else: uncertainty. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Snoop caught it. That flicker of doubt gave him a sliver of hope. "You don't know me," Snoop said softly, breaking the tense silence. His voice carried no malice, only calmness. The officer hesitated, clearly not expecting such a response. Most people in Snoop's position would have been screaming, pleading, or lashing out in desperation. But Snoop wasn't most people. He had spent his entire life learning how to adapt, how to turn hostility into understanding, even if it seemed impossible. Snoop began talking, not arguing or defending himself, but sharing pieces of his story. He spoke about growing up in Long Beach, about the struggles of living in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and dreams often went unfulfilled. He talked about his love for music, how it became his escape from the harsh realities of street life. "I used to rap on corners just to make folks laugh," he said, injecting a hint of humor into his tone. "Never thought I'd be standing here tonight, though." At first, the officer dismissed him, rolling his eyes and muttering under his breath. But Snoop didn't stop. He kept weaving his narrative, painting vivid pictures of his journey from a kid with big dreams to a rising star in the music industry. He described the long nights in the studio, the sacrifices he'd made, and the joy he felt when he finally heard his songs on the radio. Slowly, ever so slightly, the tension began to ease. The officer's posture relaxed, and the gun lowered, just a fraction. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to both Snoop and the officer, the scene outside was far from quiet. Neighbors had started gathering, drawn by the flashing lights and raised voices. Some peered cautiously through their curtains, while others stepped onto their porches to get a better look. Among them was Maria, a young woman who lived across the street. She recognized Snoop immediately. He'd performed at a local community event months earlier, advocating for peace and unity in the neighborhood. Seeing him pinned against a car with a gun to his head filled her with outrage and fear. Maria grabbed her phone and began recording the incident, her hands trembling as she steadied the camera. She knew the footage could serve as crucial evidence, should things escalate further. Others followed suit, pulling out their phones to document what was happening. A few brave souls even called 911, reporting the alarming confrontation to authorities. "There's a cop threatening a man with a gun," one caller whispered urgently into the phone. "It looks bad. Really bad." Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and soon a small crowd had formed. Murmurs of disbelief and anger rippled through the group. Many had experienced similar run-ins with law enforcement, making this moment feel painfully familiar. Yet there was also a sense of solidarity, an unspoken agreement that they wouldn't stand idly by while injustice unfolded before their eyes. Someone shouted encouragement to Snoop, urging him to stay strong. Another person yelled at the officer, demanding to know why he was treating Snoop so harshly. Though the officer ignored them, the growing attention added pressure to the already volatile situation. Back at the center of it all, Snoop continued engaging the officer, his tone conversational yet deliberate. He sprinkled jokes throughout his stories, lightening the mood whenever possible. "Man, my mama would kill me if she saw me getting into trouble again," he quipped, chuckling despite the gravity of the moment. To his surprise, the officer cracked a faint smile, a fleeting acknowledgement of shared humanity. It was a small victory, but one that gave Snoop renewed confidence. He realized that beneath the uniform and the badge, the officer was still human, susceptible to emotion and connection. "You've got a family too, right?" Snoop asked suddenly, shifting gears. The question caught the officer off guard. For a moment he didn't respond, his expression unreadable. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "Yeah," he muttered, almost involuntarily. Encouraged by the opening, Snoop pressed on. "Must be hard doing this job day in and day out, people judging you, hating you, I can't imagine." His words weren't accusatory, they were empathetic, designed to bridge the gap between them rather than widen it. The officer's demeanor softened further, though he remained guarded. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the growing crowd. The attention was clearly making him uneasy, forcing him to reconsider his next move. Snoop seized the opportunity, leaning slightly forward, as much as the officer's grip allowed. "Look, man," he said earnestly, "we can end this without anybody getting hurt. Let's just walk away from this, okay? Nobody needs to lose, tonight." His plea resonated more deeply than either of them expected. The officer hesitated, his grip loosening just enough for Snoop to feel a glimmer of relief. For the first time since the ordeal began, it seemed like de-escalation might actually be possible. But before anything could happen, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Backup had arrived. The arrival of additional police cars changed everything. Blue and red lights bathed the street in a kaleidoscope of colors, illuminating the faces of bystanders and officers alike. The original officer stepped back instinctively, holstering his weapon as his colleagues approached. Relief washed over Snoop, though he remained cautious. He knew the danger wasn't entirely gone. The presence of more officers could either help or harm, depending on how they interpreted the situation. One of the new arrivals, a sergeant with stripes on his uniform, took charge immediately. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his gaze darting between Snoop and the original officer. The latter stammered, attempting to justify his actions. "This guy was acting suspicious," he claimed, pointing vaguely at Snoop. "I thought he might be armed." The accusation drew murmurs of disbelief from the crowd. Snoop raised his hand slightly, speaking up before tensions could flare again. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said firmly but respectfully. "I'm just trying to get home." The sergeant studied him for a moment, then turned to the other officer. "Did you find any weapons during your search?" he asked pointedly. The officer shook his head, unable to meet his superior's eyes. Realizing the flimsiness of his case, he fell silent. The sergeant sighed, clearly frustrated by the spectacle unfolding in front of neighbors and witnesses. "Let's wrap this up," he ordered, motioning for everyone to disperse. For Snoop, the reprieve came as a blessing. As the officers conferred among themselves, he straightened his clothes and exhaled deeply, feeling the adrenaline begin to ebb. The crowd erupted into applause, cheering for him and condemning the treatment he'd endured. Maria stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I recorded everything," she told him, her voice trembling with emotion. "Just in case you need it." Snoop nodded gratefully, touched by her bravery. "Thank you," he said simply, his gratitude genuine. In that moment, surrounded by strangers turned allies, he felt a profound sense of community, a reminder that even in darkness, light can emerge. Though the immediate threat had passed, the incident left an indelible mark on Snoop. As he climbed back into his car and drove away, he couldn't shake the memory of the gun pressed against his head or the hatred in the officer's voice. But he also remembered the power of his own resilience, the ability to rise above fear and hatred using nothing but words and compassion. That night, Snoop proved not only to himself, but to everyone watching that true strength lies not in aggression, but in understanding, and that lesson would stay with him forever. As the crowd dispersed and the flashing lights of police cars faded into the distance, Snoop Dogg sat quietly in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. His hands were still trembling slightly, though he tried to steady them by taking slow, deliberate breaths. The adrenaline that had surged through him during the confrontation was now ebbing away, leaving behind a heavy exhaustion. But even as his body began to relax, his mind remained restless. He replayed the events of the night over and over, the sound of the gun clicking, the officer's hateful words, the way the crowd had rallied around him. It wasn't just fear or anger that lingered. It was a deep sense of responsibility. Something inside him whispered that this moment couldn't end here. It had to mean something more. Snoop drove slowly through the streets of South Central LA, each turn bringing him closer to home but no nearer to peace. He thought about how easily the situation could have spiraled out of control. If the officer hadn't hesitated, if the crowd hadn't gathered, if backup hadn't arrived. He shuddered at the possibilities. For years, he'd heard stories about black men being killed during routine traffic stops, their lives snuffed out in moments of unchecked aggression. Those stories always seemed distant, like tragedies that happened to someone else. But now, they felt painfully personal. "That could have been me," he muttered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. And yet, somehow, it wasn't. Against all odds, he'd walked away unharmed. Why? What made his story different? The answer came to him gradually, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. It wasn't luck or fate, it was action. Snoop realized that his decision to stay calm, to engage the officer with empathy rather than hostility, had played a crucial role in diffusing the situation. By refusing to mirror the hatred directed at him, he'd created space for humanity to shine through, even in someone who seemed determined to deny it. That realization filled him with a strange mix of pride and purpose. He knew he couldn't change the world overnight, but maybe, just maybe, he could use his platform to spark meaningful conversations. After all, he wasn't just Calvin Broadus Jr., a man who'd survived a harrowing encounter with racism. He was Snoop Dogg, an artist whose music reached millions worldwide. If anyone could turn pain into progress, it was him. When Snoop finally pulled into his driveway, he didn't go inside right away. Instead, he sat in his car for a while, staring at the dashboard as thoughts swirled in his head. He picked up his phone and scrolled through social media, already seeing posts about what had happened. Videos recorded by bystanders had begun, circulating online, accompanied by hashtags like "Justice for Snoop" and "End Police Brutality." Comments poured in from fans and strangers alike, expressing outrage, support, and admiration for how he'd handled himself. Reading those messages brought tears to his eyes, not because he craved validation, but because he saw hope in the collective voices calling for change. But Snoop also knew that hashtags alone wouldn't fix the systemic issues plaguing communities like his. Real change required action, hard, sustained effort that went beyond words. As he scrolled, he noticed one comment that stood out. "Snoop should sue the department. They can't get away with treating us like this." While Party Of him understood the sentiment, another part recoiled at the idea. Retaliation wouldn't solve anything, he thought. It would only deepen the divide between law enforcement and the people they were supposed to protect. No, revenge wasn't the answer. What mattered most was finding a way to prevent others from enduring what he had tonight. With newfound clarity, Snoop grabbed his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. On the other end, his manager answered groggily. It was late after all. But Snoop didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Yo, I need your help," he said, his tone serious. "We gotta do something big, something real." Over the next hour, they brainstormed ideas, discussing everything from organizing protests to collaborating with advocacy groups. By the time Snoop hung up, he had a plan forming in his mind. This wasn't going to be about blame or bitterness. It was going to be about building bridges and fostering understanding. The next morning, news outlets across the country picked up the story. Headlines blared variations of the same narrative. Rapper Snoop Dogg held at gunpoint during traffic. Stop, and witnesses describe racist police encounter with hip-hop icon. Reporters camped outside Snoop's house, eager to capture his reaction. When he finally stepped outside to address the media, he looked every bit the superstar, dressed casually in a tracksuit and sunglasses, but his demeanor was unusually somber. Flanked by close friends and advisors, he faced the cameras with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. "I'm not gonna lie. It was scary," Snoop admitted, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. "But I'm standing here today because God kept me safe, and because good people came together to make sure justice wasn't ignored." He paused, letting the weight of his statement sink in before continuing. "This ain't about me, though. It's about everybody who's ever been treated unfairly by the system. We can't keep letting fear and hatred tear us apart. It's time we talk about these problems honestly and figure out how to move forward, together." His message resonated deeply, earning praise from activists, celebrities, and everyday citizens alike. Social media lit up with support, with many applauding Snoop's focus on unity rather than division. Even critics who had previously dismissed him as just another entertainer took notice, acknowledging the sincerity in his call for reform. Within hours, organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform reached out, offering partnerships and resources to amplify his efforts. Snoop accepted graciously, knowing that collaboration would be key to creating lasting impact. In the days that followed, Snoop threw himself into advocacy work with the same passion he brought to his music. He organized benefit concerts using proceeds to fund grassroots initiatives aimed at improving community police relations. One event, held in a park near where the incident occurred, drew thousands of attendees. Artists, activists, and local leaders joined forces to celebrate resilience while addressing the challenges facing marginalized communities. Snoop performed some of his biggest hits, but he also shared the stage with speakers who spoke candidly about racial profiling, police, accountability, and the importance of dialogue. "Music brings people together," he told the cheering crowd, "and when we come together, we're unstoppable." Beyond public events, Snoop worked behind the scenes to mentor young artists and entrepreneurs, encouraging them to use their platforms for positive change. He visited schools and youth centers, sharing his own experiences and urging kids to dream big despite the obstacles they faced. "You don't gotta let your circumstances define you," he often said. "You can rise above them. Trust me, I've been there." His authenticity struck a chord with audiences of all ages, inspiring countless individuals to believe in their potential. Meanwhile, the fallout from the traffic stop continued to unfold. The LAPD launched an internal investigation into the officers' conduct, spurred by public pressure and the viral videos documenting the incident. While the process dragged on, Snoop remained patient, trusting that transparency and accountability would prevail. In interviews, he reiterated his commitment to nonviolence and understanding, even when asked whether he harbored resentment toward the officer. "Nah, I don't hold grudges," he replied simply. "What's done is done. Now it's about making sure it doesn't happen again." As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of that fateful night became impossible to ignore. Conversations about systemic racism and police misconduct gained momentum, fueled in part by Snoop's unwavering advocacy. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing oversight of law enforcement agencies, citing his case as evidence of the urgent need for reform. Community forums sprang up across the nation, providing spaces for open dialogue between residents and officers. Slowly but surely, cracks in the wall of mistrust began to heal, not completely, but enough to inspire hope. For Snoop, the experience served as both a wake-up call and a turning point. It reminded him of the power of vulnerability and the strength found in staying true to oneself. More importantly, it reinforced his belief in the transformative power of communication. Whether through music, activism, or simple acts of kindness, he proved that connection could bridge even the widest divides. Looking back, he viewed the ordeal not as a defeat, but as a defining moment, a testament to resilience, wisdom, and the enduring spirit of a man determined to rise above hatred. Years later, when reflecting on the incident, Snoop smiled knowingly. "They tried to break me," he said, leaning back in his chair during an interview, "but instead they showed me exactly who I am. And you know what? I'm proud of that." The months following the incident were a whirlwind for Snoop Dogg. What started as a terrifying encounter with a racist police officer had transformed into a catalyst for change, not just in his own life, but in the broader fight against systemic racism and police brutality. The world watched closely as Snoop navigated this new chapter, balancing his role as an entertainer with his growing responsibilities as an advocate for justice. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, frustration, and exhaustion, but Snoop approached every challenge with the same determination that had carried him through the darkest hours of his career. One of the first major steps Snoop took was partnering with civil rights organizations to amplify their efforts. Groups like the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, and Black Lives Matter welcomed his involvement, recognizing the unique platform he brought to the table. Together, they launched campaigns aimed at educating the public about racial profiling, police misconduct, and the need for legislative reform. These initiatives included town hall meetings, workshops, and online resources designed to empower communities to demand accountability from law enforcement. Snoop didn't just lend his name to these projects, he actively participated, often traveling across the country to speak at events and meet with local leaders. At one such event in Oakland, California, Snoop stood before a packed auditorium, addressing an audience that ranged from teenagers to senior citizens. "This ain't just my story, it's our story," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "Every time someone gets treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, it affects all of us. We gotta stand together, support each other, and push for real change." His words struck a chord, earning thunderous applause. Many attendees approached him afterward, sharing their own experiences with discrimination and thanking him for shining a light on issues they felt had long been ignored. While advocacy work consumed much of his time, Snoop never lost sight of his roots in music. In fact, he channeled his emotions from the traffic stop incident into his art, creating some of the most powerful tracks of his career. One song, titled "Rise Above It All," became an anthem for resilience and unity. Its lyrics spoke directly to the struggles faced by marginalized communities, blending raw honesty with messages of hope and perseverance. Lines like, "They tried to break me down, but I built myself up strong. 'Cause love will always win when hate feels so wrong," resonated deeply with fans, climbing charts and sparking conversations worldwide. To ensure the song's impact extended beyond entertainment, Snoop donated a portion of its proceeds to organizations working toward criminal justice reform. He also released a music video featuring footage from protests, community gatherings, and interviews with activists. The visuals painted a vivid picture of both the pain and the progress happening across America, reinforcing the idea that art could be a force for good. Fans praised Snoop for using his talent to inspire action, calling the project one of the most meaningful contributions to modern hip-hop culture. Despite his success in raising awareness, Snoop faced criticism from certain quarters. Some skeptics accused him of exploiting the incident for publicity, questioning whether his newfound activism was genuine or merely a PR stunt. Others argued that celebrities shouldn't involve themselves in political matters, suggesting that Snoop should stick to making music. But Snoop brushed off the negativity, choosing instead to focus on the positive impact he was making. "If people want to criticize me for standing up for what's right, let them," he told reporters during a press conference. "I'm not doing this for clout. I'm doing it because it's necessary." His response earned widespread admiration, particularly among younger generations who looked up to him as a role model. Social media flooded with posts supporting Snoop, with hashtags like Gear, Snoop for Change trending alongside clips of his performances and speeches. Even those who had initially doubted his intentions began to see the sincerity behind his actions. When asked how he managed to stay grounded amidst the chaos, Snoop credited his upbringing. "Growing up in Long Beach taught me a lot about staying humble and focused," he explained. "No matter what happens, you gotta keep your head high. And remember why you're doing what you're doing." As the months passed, the ripple effects of Snoop's advocacy continued to spread. Lawmakers took notice of the growing public outcry, introducing legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within police departments. Bills requiring body cameras for officers, independent investigations of misconduct cases, and mandatory de-escalation training gained traction in state legislatures. While progress was slow, Snoop remained optimistic, knowing that change rarely happened overnight. He attended hearings, testified before committees, and even met with lawmakers to discuss policy proposals. His presence added weight to the arguments being made, drawing attention to issues that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. One particularly memorable moment occurred during a congressional hearing in Washington, D.C. Snoop sat alongside activists and legal experts, patiently waiting his turn to speak. When he finally addressed the panel, his testimony was both heartfelt and compelling. "I've seen firsthand what happens when power is abused," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "But I've also seen how compassion and understanding can turn things around. We owe it to ourselves and future generations to build a system that works for everyone, not just a select few." His words moved many in attendance, including several lawmakers who pledged to prioritize reform efforts moving forward. Back home in Los Angeles, Snoop stayed deeply connected to his community. He invested in local businesses, funded after-school programs, and supported initiatives aimed at reducing youth violence. One of his proudest achievements was establishing a mentorship program for young artists, providing them with access to recording studios, industry professionals, and educational resources, dubbed "Ra from the Block to the Booth." The program quickly gained popularity, attracting participants from neighborhoods across the city. For Snoop, it was about more than teaching kids how to rap. It was about showing them that they had value and potential, regardless of their circumstances. "I see myself in these kids," Snoop admitted during a visit to one of the program's sessions. "They're talented, smart, and full of dreams, but they need guidance and opportunities to succeed. That's what I'm here for." His genuine care for the participants shone through in every interaction, earning him respect and admiration from students and staff alike. Many of the young artists went on to achieve success, crediting Snoop with helping them find their voice and purpose. By the end of the year, Snoop's efforts had yielded tangible results. The LAPD implemented several reforms recommended during the investigation into the officers' conduct, including mandatory bias training and stricter protocols for traffic stops. While critics argued that these changes didn't go far enough, Snoop viewed them as a step in the right direction. "Progress takes time," he reminded supporters during a rally celebrating the updates. "We're planting seeds today so we can grow something better tomorrow." The original officer involved in the incident faced disciplinary action, though details of his punishment remained confidential. Regardless, the case served as a reminder of the importance of holding individuals accountable for their actions. More importantly, it highlighted the need for systemic changes that addressed the root causes of racial injustice. For Snoop, the journey was far from over. He knew there would always be challenges ahead, setbacks that tested his resolve and forced him to adapt. But he also knew that he couldn't give up, not when so many lives depended on the work he was doing. Reflecting on everything that had transpired, he felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for surviving that night, but for having the chance to make a difference. It's funny how life works sometimes, he mused during a quiet moment at home. You think you're just trying to get through the day and then something happens that changes everything. I'm not saying it's been easy, but I'm glad I didn't let fear stop me from speaking out. Because if I can help even one person feel less alone, then it's all worth it. With those words, Snoop reaffirmed his commitment to the cause, proving once again that true strength lies not in avoiding adversity, but in rising above it and bringing others along for the ride. As the years rolled on, Snoop Dogg's advocacy work became an inseparable part of his identity. What had started as a reaction to a harrowing personal experience evolved into a lifelong mission to challenge systemic injustice and uplift marginalized communities. His efforts weren't confined to speeches or benefit concerts. They rippled outward, touching lives in ways he couldn't have predicted. For Snoop, this wasn't just about making headlines. It was about leaving a legacy that would outlast him, one rooted in compassion, resilience, and action. One of the most significant milestones came when Snoop co-founded an organization called Unity Through Music, a nonprofit dedicated to bridging gaps between law enforcement and the communities they served. The initiative aimed to foster mutual understanding through shared experiences, whether that meant hosting joint workshops, organizing cultural exchange programs, or simply encouraging officers and residents to sit down together for honest conversations. At its core, Unity Through Music believed that art could be a universal language, capable of breaking down barriers where words alone often failed. The launch event for Unity Through Music took place in Compton, a city long plagued by tensions between police and citizens. Hundreds gathered at a local park, including families, activists, and uniformed officers. Snoop opened the day with a speech that struck a delicate balance between hope and accountability. "We're not here to erase the past," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "We're here to learn from it, to build something stronger, better, and fairer for everyone." He then invited a group of young musicians to perform, alongside members of the LAPD choir, blending rap verses with gospel harmonies. The performance brought tears to many eyes, symbolizing the possibility of reconciliation even after years of mistrust. While Snoop continued to champion reform on a national scale, he never lost sight of the individuals whose stories inspired his work. He made it a point to meet regularly with victims of police brutality and their families, listening to their pain and amplifying their voices whenever possible. One such meeting took place in Chicago, where Snoop sat down with the family of a teenager who had been fatally shot during a traffic stop. The mother, visibly heartbroken but resolute, thanked him for keeping her son's memory alive. "You remind me that I'm not fighting alone," she told him, clutching his hand tightly. Snoop nodded solemnly, promising to honor her son's life by pushing harder for change. These encounters left an indelible mark on Snoop, reminding him why he couldn't afford to grow complacent. They also reinforced his belief in the importance of storytelling, not just through music but through film and documentaries as well. In collaboration with award-winning directors, Snoop produced a documentary series titled Voices Unheard, which highlighted untold stories of racial injustice and resilience. Each episode focused on a different individual or community, showcasing both the struggles they faced and the strength they demonstrated in overcoming them. The series premiered to critical acclaim, earning praise for its raw honesty and unflinching portrayal of reality. Snoop's influence extended beyond activism and entertainment. It permeated education as well. Recognizing the power of knowledge in driving social change, he partnered with universities to establish scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing degrees in fields like criminal justice, law, and public policy. These scholarships, collectively known as the Future Leaders Fund, provided financial support and mentorship opportunities, ensuring that the next generation of change-makers would have the tools they needed to succeed. At a scholarship gala, held in Atlanta, Snoop addressed a room full of aspiring leaders, urging them to use their education to create meaningful impact. "Don't let anyone tell you your dreams are too big," he said, his trademark grin lighting up the stage. You've got the power to rewrite the rules, to turn systems upside down if that's what it takes. Just stay true to yourself and remember why you started. The recipients of the scholarships were equally inspired, vowing to carry forward Snoop's vision of equity and justice. One recipient, a young woman named Jasmine, later became a prominent civil rights attorney, crediting Snoop with giving her the confidence to pursue her goals. He showed me that no matter where you come from, you can make a difference, she said in an interview years later. That belief has guided me every step of the way. Despite his successes, Snoop remained acutely aware of the challenges still facing society. Racism and inequality persisted, manifesting in new forms even as old ones were dismantled. Police reform efforts encountered resistance, with some arguing that changes compromised officer safety. Meanwhile, debates over defunding versus restructuring, law enforcement divided communities further. Snoop navigated these complexities with characteristic grace, refusing to let setbacks diminish his resolve. Instead, he doubled down on his commitment to dialogue and collaboration, emphasizing the need for patience and perseverance. I know it's frustrating, he admitted during a panel discussion on racial justice. Sometimes it feels like we're taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. But progress isn't linear, it's messy, unpredictable, and slow. The key is to keep moving even when it feels impossible. His words resonated deeply, particularly among younger activists who often felt overwhelmed by the enormity of the task ahead. To sustain momentum, Snoop launched an annual summit called the Bridge Builders Conference, bringing together artists, activists, policymakers, and everyday citizens to share ideas and strategies for fostering unity. The conference quickly gained renown as a hub for innovation and inspiration, attracting participants from around the globe. Keynote speakers ranged from grassroots organizers to high-profile figures like Barack Obama and Angela Davis, each contributing unique perspectives to the conversation. Attendees left feeling empowered and equipped to tackle issues in their own communities. On a personal level, Snoop found solace in reflecting on how far he'd come since that fateful night in South Central LA. The incident that once threatened to define him instead became a testament to his ability to rise above adversity. It taught him invaluable lessons about courage, empathy, and the transformative power of vulnerability. Rather than dwelling on the trauma, he chose to see it as a turning point, a moment that forced him to confront uncomfortable truths and channel his pain into purpose. Years later, when asked about the lasting impact of the encounter, Snoop smiled thoughtfully. "It changed me, man," he said, leaning back in his chair during an interview. "Not just in terms of my activism, but in how I approach life itself. I used to think success was all about fame and fortune. Now I realize it's about using whatever blessings you have to lift others up. That's what gives life meaning." His humility and wisdom earned him widespread admiration, transcending generations and industries. Young fans idolized him not just for his music, but for his unwavering commitment to doing good. Older audiences respected him for his maturity and willingness to evolve. Even critics, who had once dismissed him as a mere entertainer, now acknowledged his contributions to societal progress. As time went on, Snoop's story became a beacon of hope for countless individuals navigating their own struggles. Whether it was a teenager dreaming of escaping gang violence, a single mother fighting for equal treatment in the workplace, or a college student advocating for climate justice, people found strength in knowing that someone as influential as Snoop Dogg had faced similar battles and emerged victorious. His journey reminded them that no obstacle was insurmountable, no dream too distant. In 2025, Snoop released his memoir, aptly titled From the Streets to the Stars, A Life of Resilience. The book chronicled his rise from humble beginnings to global stardom, interweaving tales of triumph with reflections on loss, love, and legacy. Chapters detailing the infamous traffic stop incident stood out as particularly poignant, capturing both the terror of the moment and the clarity it brought him. Critics hailed the memoir as a masterpiece, praising its authenticity and emotional depth. Readers described it as more than a biography, It's a guide to living with purpose. Looking back on everything he'd accomplished, Snoop felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He knew he hadn't done it alone. His success was the result of countless hands reaching out, lifting him up when he stumbled. From his mother's unwavering support to the strangers who filmed his confrontation with the officer, each person played a role in shaping his path. And so, as he stood on stage at the Grammy Awards accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award, he took a moment to thank them all. "This ain't just my story, it's ours," he said, scanning the audience with tears glistening in his eyes. "Every time you stood with me, cheered for me, or challenged me to do better, you helped me become who I am today. So this award belongs to all of us, to everyone fighting for a world where love conquers hate and justice prevails." The standing ovation that followed lasted several minutes, a fitting tribute to a man who had dedicated his life to making the world a little brighter. As the applause faded and Snoop walked off stage, he paused briefly, glancing out at the sea of faces. For a moment he allowed himself to bask in the knowledge that he had truly made a difference, and that his work would continue inspiring generations to come.